Okay, so this is The Necessity of Chivalry by C.S. Lewis. Uh, it's an essay that I'm going to be reading for you guys. But before we begin, I just wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about the one person in my life who introduced me to both the ideas of chivalry and to C.S. Lewis, which is my grandfather. That's why we have Mr. Bun Bun here with us today, because Mr. Bun Bun reminds me of my grandfather quite a bit. With his little nose and his little mustache and his bushy eyebrows and a little bit of that fire in his eyes sometimes. You find it, oh yeah, But my grandfather introduced me to both the ideas of chivalry and C.S. Lewis through the books, The Chronicles of Narnia, and he actually helped me to procure a set when I was much younger, so that I could read them. And through reading them, I was able to develop a better connection to him because he was actually able to talk about some of the stuff that was in the books and ask interesting questions. You know, when you're a kid and you're talking to your grandfather, and your grandfather can talk about the stuff that's in the book, but he can also relate it back to, maybe things that are going on in the real world and like how you're thinking about life and reality and everything. And so my grandfather didn't just introduce me to the idea of chivalry, he lived the idea of chivalry. um, because for his generation, those were the examples that they had to look back on, that were passed down to them when they had to make it through the toughest time in their life, which was World War II. And so I think that it had a huge effect on him and a huge effect on his life. Um, he was a religious man, always believed in God, the church, everything. But he didn't try to impose that upon me. He didn't try to say, "Oh, you have to go to church. You must do this. You have to do this." He lived by example. He went and did it. He went and did it as the example, so that you were like, "Man, if I want to be like him, I gotta live up to the same example." You know what I mean? And that's what I mean about him introducing me to the idea of chivalry. Because it wasn't just the books. It wasn't just, Robin Hood and the Three Musketeers and King Arthur and, the Knights of the Round Table. Like all the ideas that come along with all that stuff, nobility, honor, respect, loyalty, trust, forgiveness, forbearance, compassion, mercy. Like those were the big ideas that he wanted to pass down. And it was one of the most confusing things to me when I was a kid, and it was when he was the most broken up about it when I started playing video games and I started playing first person shooters and started shooting everything. He was that broke him. He was torn up. Uh, he could never put those two things back together in his brain again. You know what I mean? It was like it was too much for him to try to wrap his head around, like how the next generation could see what had happened and still want to go down the same path. And that was like the one of the biggest lessons or impressions that he made upon me. And I don't know too much about my grandfather, his involvement in World War II, other than that he trained paratroopers, uh, parachutists, paratrooper, whatever you want to call them. He wasn't stationed in the UK; he was stationed elsewhere. But just the idea that you're going to train the guys to jump out of the plane, like you gotta get a bunch of guys who they're jumping out into uncertain future, uncertain reality, right? What's going to happen to them when they jump out of that plane at night, you know? And he's got to build them up, teach them how to do it, teach them how to land on the ground safely, right? Get down to the ground safely, the whole thing, right? Uh, and how many people do you teach that to? You know, because that's your part, that's your bit, that's the thing that you're supposed to do. How many people do you watch go out that back door? How many do you ever get to see again? You know, I think that's probably why. It's probably why he didn't want to see that happen to another generation. And he always tried to impress upon me that there had to be a better solution to the world's problems and violence, you know? And so that's why I'm going to read for you guys today The Necessity of Chivalry. Oh, before we start, I'm just going to read the opening leaf here, just so we have a little bit more of an idea about C.S. Lewis, but then we'll get into the essay. So, although C.S. Lewis professed never to read newspapers and recommended doses of good literature as an antidote to news, he himself was an occasional journalist. All but 2 of the 19 essays in this volume, previously uncollected, first appeared in newspapers or magazines. They have in common Lewis's characteristic sanity and persuasiveness. Those written between 1940 and 1945 reflect largely on questions generated by the war: democratic values, the need for an updated chivalry, and the cynicism of the modern soldier. Other essays examine the threats to educational and spiritual fulfillment, while Section Literature and On Living in the Atomic Age address literary censorship and our very survival, issues debated even more passionately today than in Lewis's lifetime. The role of journalist, Walter Hooper points out, suits Lewis admirably, for he possessed to an astonishing degree the gift of saying what needed to be said, clearly and briefly, and, one might add, engagingly. It was a role that provided new riches for Lewis's readers. And so this is Present Concerns. It's a collection of C.S. Lewis's essays. I have not, to my shame, read all of these. I probably need to sit down and read the rest of them. But today we're going to be reading The Necessity of Chivalry, which is the first one. That's why I bought this book. I was like, once I heard, once I came across it on YouTube, researching chivalry. And once I came across it, I was like, man, I need to be able to hold on to this in my own hands. You know, I need this piece of the universe, just in case anybody ever else comes along and needs to hear this lesson, this particular one. And so that's what we're going to read today. The Necessity of Chivalry. The word chivalry has meant, at different times, a good many different things. From heavy cavalry to giving a woman a seat in a train. But if we want to understand chivalry as an ideal, distinct from other ideals, if we want to isolate that particular conception of the man, comme il faut, comme as he may, which was the special contribution of the Middle Ages to our culture, we cannot do better than turn to the words addressed to the greatest of all the imaginary knights in Malory's Mort d'Arthur, The Death of King Arthur. Thou art the meekest man, said Sir Ector to the dead Lancelot. Thou art the meekest man that ever ate in hall among ladies, and thou art the sternest knight to thy mortal foe that ever put spear in the rest. The important thing about this ideal is, of course, the double demand that it makes upon human nature. The knight is a man of blood and iron, a man familiar with the sight of smashed faces and the ragged stumps of lopped-off limbs. He's also a demure, almost maiden-like guest in hall, a gentle, modest, unobtrusive man. He is not a compromise or a happy mean between ferocity and meekness. He is fierce to the nth and meek to the nth. That means to the nth degree. The final, he's as fierce as he can possibly be, and he's as meek as he can possibly be. If you think about man today, man needs to be fierce so that he can defend himself and defend the ones that he loves. But he also needs to be meek so that he can be the man that they love, that they need him to be. So he has to combine both of those features, right? When Lancelot heard himself pronounced the best knight in the world, he wept, as he had been a child that had been beaten. That might be confusing to somebody. The reason Lancelot is weeping for being told that he's the best knight in the world is because when he's told this, Lancelot realizes that if he had just followed his heart and everybody had followed his heart with him, he would have been able to prevent so much more heartbreak. And that's what he weeps for, right? He weeps because he should have tried harder. He's still the best. He's the best one. And he's like, I'm still not good enough. What, you may ask, is the relevance of this ideal to the modern world? It is terribly relevant. It may or may not be practicable. The Middle Ages notoriously failed to obey it. But it is certainly practical. Practical is the fact that men in the desert must find water or die. Let us be quite clear, the ideal is a paradox. Most of us, having grown up among the ruins of the chivalrous tradition, were taught in our youth that a bully is always a coward. Our first week at school refuted this lie, along with its corollary that a truly brave man is always gentle. It is a pernicious lie because it misses the real novelty and originality of the medieval demand upon human nature. Worse still, it represents, as a natural fact, something which is really a human ideal, nowhere fully attained and nowhere attained at all without arduous discipline. It is refuted by history and experience. Homer's Achilles knows nothing of the demand that the brave should also be modest and the merciful. He kills men as they cry for quarter, or takes them prisoner and kills them at leisure. The heroes of the sagas know nothing of it. They are as stern to inflict as they are stubborn to endure. Attila had a custom of fiercely rolling his eyes as if he wished to enjoy the terror which he inspired. Even the Romans, when gallant enemies fell into their hands, led them to the streets for a show, and cut their throats in the cellars when the show was over. At school, we found that the hero of the first 15 might well be a noisy, arrogant, overbearing bully. In the last war, we often found that the man who was invaluable in a show was the man for whom in peacetime we could not easily find room except in Dartmoor prison. Such is heroism by nature, heroism outside the chivalrous tradition. The medieval ideal brought together two things which have no natural tendency to gravitate towards one another. It brought them together for that very reason. It taught humility and forbearance to the great warrior, because everyone knew by experience how much he usually needed that lesson. It demanded valor of the urbane and modest man, because everyone knew that he was likely as not to be a milk sow. In so doing, the Middle Ages fixed on the one hope of the world. It may or may not be possible to produce by the thousand men who combine the two sides of Lancelot's character. And if it is not possible, then all talk of any lasting happiness or dignity in human society is pure moonshine. If we cannot produce Lancelots, humanity falls into two sections: those who can deal in blood and iron, but cannot be meek and whole, and those who are meek and whole, but useless in battle. For the third class, who are both brutal in peace and cowardly in war, need not here be discussed. When this dissociation of the two halves of Lancelot occurs, history becomes a horribly simple affair. The history of the Near East is like that. Hardy barbarians swarm down from the highlands and obliterate a civilization. Then they become civilized themselves and go soft. Then a new wave of barbarians comes down and obliterates them, and the cycle begins over again. Modern machinery will not change this cycle. It will only enable the same thing to happen on a larger scale. Indeed, nothing much else can ever happen if the stern and the meek fall into two mutually exclusive classes. And never forget that this is their natural condition. A man who combines both characters, the knight, is a work not of nature, but of art. Of that art which has human beings instead of canvas or marble for its medium. In the world today, there is a liberal or enlightened tradition which regards the combative side of man's nature as a pure atavistic evil and scouts the chivalrous sentiment as part of the false glamour of war. There's also a neo-heroic tradition which scouts the chivalrous sentiment as a weak sentimentality, which would raise from its grave, its shallow and unquiet grave, the pre-Christian ferocity of Achilles by a modern invocation. Already, in our own Kipling, the heroic qualities of his favorite subalterns are dangerously removed from the meekness and urbanity. One cannot quite imagine the adult Skidalki in the same room as the best of Nelson's captains. Unless with Sidney. These two tendencies between them weave the world's shroud. Happily, we live better than we write, better than we deserve. Lancelot is not yet irrecoverable. To some of us, this war brought a glorious surprise in the discovery that after 20 years of cynicism and cocktails, the heroic values were still unimpaired in the younger generation and ready for exercise the moment they were called upon. Yet with this sternness, there is much meekness. From all I hear, the young pilots in the RAF, to whom we owe our life from hour to hour, are not less, but more urbane and modest than the 1915 model. In short, there is still life in the tradition which the Middle Ages inaugurated, but the maintenance of that life depends in part upon knowing that the knightly character is art and not nature, something that needs to be achieved, not something that can be relied upon to happen. And this knowledge is especially necessary as we grow more democratic. In previous centuries, the vestiges of chivalry were kept alive by a specialized class, from whom they spread to the other classes, partly by imitation and partly by coercion. Now it seems the people must either be chivalrous on its own resources, or else choose between the remaining alternatives of brutality or softness. This is indeed part of a general problem of a classless society, which is too seldom mentioned. Will its ethos be a synthesis of what was best in all of the classes, or a mere pool, or the sediment of all and the virtues of none? But as too large a subject for the rear end of this article, my theme is chivalry. I've tried to show that this old tradition is practical and vital. The ideal embodied in Lancelot is escapism, in a sense never dreamed by those that use the word. It offers the only possible escape from a world divided between wolves who do not understand and sheep who cannot defend the things that make life desirable. There was, to be sure, a rumor in the last century that wolves would gradually become extinct by some natural process, but this seems to have been an exaggeration. That's the necessity of chivalry, guys. It's a subject that we're going to be talking a lot more about here on the channel. And so this is just the beginning. This is our first step. I hope you guys are going to continue to go on this journey with me. And, maybe by the time we're done, maybe we can do the song and dance about the Knights of the Round Table, right? So I hope you guys enjoyed that. Much more to come here on the channel. And thank you for joining me. Have a good night.